Okay, New Lifers. My name's Jeff Hoyt. I am a fellow New Lifer. I've been attending New Life, as Brett affectionately pointed out, since the Stone Age. Back when Ron Ferguson was leading men's groups out of his home in Catlett is about as far back as we go, as I go. And those of you who were there then as well know how far back that is. Hey, I have a ministry. It's called The Inner Athlete, and I work with athletes and the mental part of their game, what many would consider sports psychology. Athletes, the way they perform is absolutely connected to how they think and when they think it. And so I primarily help athletes who are struggling with some part of their game that all of a sudden something's come up and they're starting to not be able to perform specifically because of the way they're thinking. Let me go here. I use this as a starting point many times. This book is called Winning Isn't Normal. Okay, and it was written back in the 80s. Dr. Bell was actually a swimmer in college, a psychologist, and he was probably one of the earlier sports psychologists, so to speak, out there. And so he wrote this book. He starts the book out asking the reader to envision a marathon and all of these runners running at one time starting. And he said, makes the point very clearly, only one of those people wins. And what makes that one person different from everybody else? In other words, he's the abnormal one. And is the title, Winning Isn't Normal. So he goes on to study and to develop the characteristics of what makes that one runner special. And of course, we've seen it in the Bible, right? In 1 Corinthians 9, verses 24 to 27, there's that very common phrase, well-known verse, run in such a way as to get the prize. Now, for a lot of people, that means, when I'm running, I'm gritting my teeth, pressing hard, just trying to squeeze everything out that I can. But to a real athlete, that idea actually means what happens before the race is what I'm doing. And that's how I'm going to run in such a way to win the prize. Think of an iceberg. And that very tip of the iceberg that comes up out of the water is what we see on TV or while we're in the stands. Just a very small part of their life as an athlete. And everything under the water is all the work and all the practice and just the rigors of what goes in, the training, the workouts that goes into being that athlete. So that when you actually see them, you're seeing the results of all that other work. And so to an athlete, that idea of running in such a way as to get the prize means, what do I do before the race? And from there, I try to, when I have opportunities to work with athletes at almost every level of competition, from little league, high school, college, and even into the pros, you've got a dynamic where many of the players on the team are average. And sometimes it's staggering how many there are. And then you've got a very small group at the top that are what some people would call superstars or the best. And so the question is, what makes that difference? And to help illustrate that, I want you to think about two athletes in particular, Michael Jordan and Tiger Woods, because these are names everybody recognizes, and they are superstars. They're icons. They are the best of the best. And contrary to public opinion, they weren't born that way. They actually had to learn how to be champions. They had to learn to think like a champion thought. And that thinking causes them to practice a certain way and work out a certain way, to train themselves a certain way. And the results of that is what brings them to the level of playing at very elite levels. And so if you ask anybody on the team, from the average to the superstars, they will tell you that there are specific things that make the superstars stand out. They do the extra things. Most of their work is done on their own. They don't depend on team practice to make them better. They practice on their own. They seek to be exceptional at what they're doing. They train to exceed their own limits and the expectations that others have of them. They appear extreme in the amounts of time and work that they put into their craft. And in every way related to their sport, they look extraordinary, or extraordinary, if you like to hear it that way. What do these words have in common? Well, if you haven't picked up on it, I'll give you a little visual aid here, okay? They all start with the letter X. And what we try to get our athletes to comprehend and attain for is to become XMen or XWomen. We want them to go and reach for the extras. As I read my Bible, I come across it all the time. And it's that same call from God, Jesus, the apostles, to be XMen and XWomen, to be extraordinary in the way that we believe, in the way that we think, and what we think about, and how we prepare ourselves, and how we live as a result of those practices. 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verses 3 through 4 is a very unique situation. When I read this, it just really had me hone in on this idea of XMen and XWomen. Paul's chastising the church, okay? He literally is telling them, you're acting like babies. There's jealousy, there's quarrels. He said, you're acting very worldly. You're acting like everybody else. Ordinary, regular. They're doing what everybody else is doing. And he actually says, if you read through there, there's a phrase there where he says, why are you acting like mere men? And I want you to really listen to that. Mere men, okay? That's the ordinary. That's the regular. That's what everybody else is doing. XMen and XWomen of the Bible, they're everywhere. Just a few days ago, Brett had a devotional where he was teaching from Hebrews 12 and went back to 11, where we've got that great men and women of faith. Those are XMen. Those are XWomen. Okay, John the Baptist was definitely an X-man, I mean, living out in the wild, eating wild food and dressing au naturel. I mean, it's just, he stood out in a crowd, right? You couldn't miss him if he happened to wander into town. King David was definitely an X-man. And interestingly, David had a group of men in his army. It was not his entire army. He had a group in his army that were called the mighty men of David. And they were, if you will, the Navy SEALs of David's army. They were the guys that did the super stealth missions, and there's a story, an account in the Bible of David expressing the fact one evening that he was thirsty. And so these X-men, these mighty men of David, heard that and decided they would take it upon themselves to get him something to drink, and not just anything. So they snuck into town, went to one of the best wells they could find, I'm assuming, and got him a whole bunch of water, brought it back. And when he saw what they did, he actually, being an X-man, thinking thoughts that are just way up there, he poured it out. Said, how can I drink this when you risked your lives for this? This is the way X-men and X-women think. Timothy's mother and grandmother, the ones that taught him the faith, these were X-women, okay? And of course, the ultimate X-man, Jesus, right? And you look at things like the Sermon on the Mount, and the way I read it, and definitely check everything I say, against the scriptures, because I'm not a theologian, but I read this, and to me, I know it's his invitation to the kingdom of God, and I recognize that, but it's also, to me, it's his invitation for us to become X-men and X-women. Here he's talking about loving your enemies. If somebody asks you for your shirt, give them your coat too. If somebody asks you to carry something a mile, carry it 2 miles. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are the meek. Blessed are those who mourn. Who thinks like that? Okay. Now, if I live in South Rhino, I guarantee if I walk around the street and just take a poll, unless I come across a Christian, it's going to probably, out of 10 people, there's probably going to be 0 who think and act like that, right? Just the first one, love your enemies. Who does that? Well, you may be saying to yourself right now, Jeff, do you really think I can become the Michael Jordan of Christianity? And I'm going to tell you, what I think is that God tells us that we can be the Christian version of Michael Jordan in our neighborhood, in our family, at work, at school, with our friends, within the church, and even in the world, if and when we're called to that. But yeah, I think He does call us to be XMen, and He gives us the ability to become XMen and XWomen. We have to start moving towards believing like the XMen and XWomen of the Bible. We have to start moving towards thinking like the XMen and the XWomen of the Bible. We have to start moving towards practicing like the XMen and the XWomen of the Bible did. Then we'll start playing and performing, if you will, like the XMen and the XWomen of the Bible did. You know, I've had a chance in the last couple of years to be able to start working with very young athletes, Little League, 12, 13, 14-year-old little guys and gals playing softball. And I'm always interested to know what their dreams and aspirations. I'm always wanting to asking them, what do you enjoy about playing? Because I want to hear it. It's so fresh coming, from these kids. And it always opens up the opportunity to share with them that if you want to be, you want to play in high school, you want to play in college, some will even say, they want to play pro. You recognize the fact that you've got to be different in order to be that. And you've got to become different in order to be that. Doesn't matter what you've got in terms of the physicals. And yes, I know in certain cases there are physicals that can't be trumped, but we're talking in general. There are many superstar athletes that if you take them off the baseball field, they look like accountants. Okay, and that's no aspersion against accountants. I'm just saying. I think I recently finished reading a book by Michael Jordan's trainer, Tim Grover. It's called Relentless. And I'm going to warn you, if you do get it, it is easily accessible. He's profane. He thinks very, very highly of himself because he trains the stars. He trains the best of the best. But I got to tell you, there are some very, very insightful thoughts in his book. And one of the things he shared that just really caught my attention, and something that we try to convey to athletes at every single level. I'm going to have a chance to talk to the softball team at Messiah next week, and this will be something that we are going to push. You cannot get extraordinary results from ordinary workouts. It just doesn't happen. Okay? 2 Peter chapter 1, verses 5 to 11. This is something that truly is a key part of being spiritual XMen and XWomen. You read that passage. I'm just going to hit the highlights just to save time. But this is where he talks about adding to your faith. Let me see. I've got it actually written down here. He says, for this very reason, make every effort to add to your faith goodness, knowledge, self-control, perseverance, godliness to brotherly kindness, adding brotherly kindness, adding love to brotherly kindness. And then he says, if you possess these qualities in increasing measure, in other words, if you're growing, not after you've attained it, because we can't. We're not going to be perfect. You don't expect us to be perfect. But if we are increasing in these things, that they will keep you from being ineffective and unproductive. And then down at the very last verse, he says, be all the more eager to make your calling and election sure. For if you do these things, you will never fall, is what Paul tells them. Not sometimes, never fall. If these things are increasing, okay, that's what XMen and XWomen do. They are always growing intentionally. They're not just showing up to church and expecting that by osmosis to make them totally different people, okay? Worshiping at church is fundamental, and it is something that God uses to grow us in our lives, but it's not the only thing, and we have to pay attention to that. If I had to list, and this idea of increasing, 1 Thessalonians, he's talking about pleasing God more and more, showing brotherly love more and more, being sanctified through and through. In other words, it's a process. Not that we will ever attain to the end. We will never master these things, but we'll always have something to grow, a place to grow towards. And that's actually the excitement that's part of being in the abundant life, part of being in relationship with God. XMen and XWomen are not perfect, but they love getting better. They're always learning and always looking for ways to improve. They're always doing the little things behind the scenes that make the big difference. They are regularly preparing and practicing on a daily basis. Make a lot of mistakes. They make an awful lot of mistakes. But they learn from those mistakes on their road towards improving. To them, mistakes are opportunities. And more than anything else, they are patient with their growth and improvement. They get frustrated, but part of that frustration is the motivation that causes them to want to practice more, to want to meditate more, to pray, to seek, advice and fellowship from other people, other XMen and XWomen. It's a process, and it can be a slow process, but they teach themselves how to look for and recognize the small incremental improvements, because when they see that, it drives them to want more. In athletics, it is the same thing. We see it. Kids that have that experience young, it's like lighting a fire underneath them, and they can't wait to play more. And it ends up just being a big snowball. Christian XMen and XWomen also, that idea of the first shall be last, they live like they are the last. They think of themselves as the last. They're not proud and haughty. They don't need to be. Their satisfaction doesn't come from that. My encouragement, my admonition to you at this point would be, or as Brett finally says, and actually all the teachers, all the pastors at New Life do, and I love it, the next step. Okay, what's the next step? I would encourage you to look for the XMen and XWomen in your life that are around you, those at New Life, and we got a ton of them, I'm thankful to say. From all the staff that I've met, they're all XMen and XWomen. Learn from them. When I was growing up, we used to collect baseball cards, right? You'd come with a piece of bubble gum in them, and you'd buy them, and it wasn't about the bubble gum; it was the card. You'd collect them, and you were always hoping you'd get the ones, at least one of your favorite ball players. Philippians 4, chapter 4, verses 8 through 9. Let me go ahead and read that for you. Actually, Brett had used this in his sermon just a couple of weeks ago. Finally, brethren, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is of good repute, if there is any excellence, and if there's anything worthy of praise, let your mind dwell on these things. The things that you have learned and received and heard and seen in me. He's talking about Paul. Paul knows he's an X-man. And it doesn't make him proud, but he humbly knows he's an X-man. In the sports world, we would call him humble and hungry. always wants more. He says, practice these things. And when you do, the God of peace will be with you. Okay? Look for XMen and XWomen. Study them. Learn from them. See how they practice. Ask them. I'm sure they will love to tell you, how they practice the spirituality in their lives. And let me encourage you. Let's all not be normal together as a church. Let's encourage each other to be more than mere men. That we dare each other to be different. Because with God in us, we are. Pure and simple. Hey, thanks so much for the time. I hope this has been helpful. And as I tell my athletes, go out there and make it a great day and keep moving forward. Thanks. Bye now.